Hello, my name is Dr. Megan Higgins-Gramling, and I am contributing faculty for the PPOTD program in St. Augustine. And I am sorry I can't be there live today, but I did want to send this video in because I think it's really important that we start talking about creating sustainability through occupational engagement. So, a little bit about me. I have been married now for 14 years and I have two children, one who's in third grade and one who's in first grade. I got my BS in psychology from the University of Alabama at Birmingham in 2010, my MS from UAB in 2012, and then very recently got my OTD from University of St. Augustine in 2024. So I do have a couple of certifications. I had a certification in lymphedema. I'm a mastectomy fitter. I have a certificate for trauma practitioners, and then I am a certified functional nutrition informed practitioner. And I actually own my own private practice where I do nature-based OT. So this course is designed to increase OT's knowledge of climate change and the occupations that are both helping and harming the planet. There's a good amount of research in the literature regarding climate change and public health, even in the OT world, but little has been done to actually create education around practical ways to use this knowledge in our practice every day. TAF in 2023 stated that the tendency is for OT to focus on adaptation mindset in terms of occupational engagement and performance, meaning adjusting to the impact of climate change on individual occupations. So the article goes on to state that while adaptation is necessary, we as OTs must address prevention, mitigation, and resilience. So that's the purpose of this webinar. And the same article that I mentioned explains that typical reactive and profit-driven approach to healthcare makes it difficult for our profession as OTs to tackle social issues that may seem outside of our typical biomedical model. So, the goals or objectives for this webinar are to develop an understanding of what climate change is and how it's affecting our health, also what sustainability is and why it's a viable intervention for climate and health management in this day and age, and then linking together those with the role that OT plays. We will analyze current occupations and evaluate if they're sustainable or unsustainable, and see how we can apply this knowledge to our micro, meso, and macro spheres of influence to increase wellness both in our personal lives and in our professional roles as OTs and OT educators. So lastly, I hope to combine the understanding, evaluating, and analyzing to further educate groups and communities on how to create new occupations that are both meaningful and enjoyable while being sustainable. So we can see in these definitions that sustainability immediately presents an occupational justice issue as we're concerned for future generations. So in looking at the definition of occupational justice, we can also see how climate change impacts wellness sustaining activities. If, for instance, climate change has affected the floodplains, or if there are heat waves in areas that you live. An interesting article by Drolet in 2020 stated that people in today's world have created what he labeled occupational desires, which have led to the destruction of ecosystems. In his article, he presented terminology from a 2000 article by a different author, which looked at opportunities for individuals or communities in their doing, being, becoming, and belonging, while being able to, and I'm going to quote here, live with concern for and in relation to animals, plants, and the world of nature. So the article pointed out that Scandinavian countries really took this to heart and created laws for the rights of natural environments and other living things besides humans. Drolet in 2020 also indicated an issue of occupational justice, stating, and I quote, "The occupations of today's human beings jeopardize the ability of future generations to engage in occupations, notably sustenance occupations such as feeding themselves, growing food, and drinking." So I have found most people are not as familiar looking at this glossary of terms with words like ecopation, which essentially just means engaging in sustainable occupations. So occupations that are good for our ecosystem. So being focused on what we're doing in relationship to the bigger environment we engage in through items like being aware of our carbon footprint, our water footprint, those things. Our carbon footprint, or how much greenhouse gases we emit per year, can be applied to individuals as well as groups and communities, and then globally across the world. Water footprints can get really in depth, but for this presentation, we're just going to be looking at specifically indirect and direct blue water, which includes surface water that is used to create products like our domestic water. And then green and gray water are beyond the scope of this webinar, but you can look at waterfootprint.org if you're interested in that. So in keeping with our first learning objective, let's look at how this fits into our scope of practice. So in my research, a couple of months back, I sent a pre-webinar questionnaire to 32 OTs from the US, Australia, and Canada. I didn't receive a ton of responses back. I think I got about 8 to 10. But from that, I created this quantitative data showing that the majority of people who answered were female. Not one single male responded, and I did ask them in. Over 85% were ages 21 to 40, with one person being in that 41 to 50 age group. 75% of the responders were practitioners, 50% of those providing care for up to 4 years, and then the other half providing care for over 4 years. So really a good range of new OTs versus OTs who had been around for a little while. The settings of these practitioners was really varied. 50% were working with the elderly in either a skilled nursing facility or home health, and then the others were working in school systems, outpatients, or hospitals. So one of the statistics I found interesting was that over 62% of people who took this questionnaire had not heard of sustainability being part of OT's realm, and the two that had reported that they had heard it through the OTs for Environmental Action group that I'm a part of, or they read it in the World Federation of OT Sustainability Matters report. So as you can see on this slide, a good number of people were familiar with terms like occupational justice, equity, carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, which is great, but very few people were familiar with terms like circular economy, ecopation, and then sustainability lens. I thought it was really interesting that 50% of participants considered their personal impact on the environment often, but only 25% did when it came to their professional impact. I was really happy to see that most people said that climate change was very important. That was indicated by a 1 on this scale. And thankfully, nobody put that it was not important at all, which was a 5 on the scale. The last question on the questionnaire was to please list what you hope to get from learning more information about OT and sustainability. And it was really cool to see some of the answers that I received. One participant asked for hard facts and ideas about how to reduce waste in their professional setting. A couple reported wanting to learn more new ways to implement it into practice, again, in their professional setting. One person reported that their hope was to grow a network of OT practitioners concerned about climate change, and that is definitely what I am after as well. And the last few mentioned wanting to learn just more in general about OT and sustainability. So we can see here by looking at the framework that OT has always highly valued our environment and our engagement within it. So whether that be physical geography, climate-specific conditions, but also specifically targets human-caused events in our practice framework and gives examples like high air pollution forcing a person with lung disease to stay indoors. Another component specifically mentioned in the practice framework is air quality, stating that there is a, quote, high incident of respiratory disease near an industrial district. Our national organization for OTs, OTAs, and OT students put out a policy specifically stating their commitment to sustainability and climate change. So again, we see language here that climate change is an issue of environmental, occupational, and social justice, as what we have created and continue to engage in impacts our future generations and especially marginalized communities. So specific language regarding occupational deprivation is also used here, as you can see, and can be a call to action for OTs across the world. As we'll see later on, the effects of unstable, unsustainable occupations and climate change have a direct impact on our health and wellness and the communities that we live in. So models are important for practicing clinicians and academics and students. Models help us define our scope and then offer assessment tools as well as vocabulary, especially when we're communicating with other OTs within our profession. Models also offer a reminder for the client-centeredness. And as most models include our environment as a piece of that model, it ties us back intrinsically to a big piece of the puzzle, our various environments. So according to Dr. Fisher, the 2024 model of human occupation is a good bit more dynamic than the other models have been in the past, encompassing the environmental impact on person, occupational participation, and then how people impact the environment. So this model shows that it is a person-focused model with our immediate contexts like homes and schools, workplaces. Those are going to be our microenvironments. And our local contexts like our neighborhoods and communities, which are more mesosystems, and then our global contexts like macrosystems. Those are going to include governmental healthcare policies that we have in place, as well as cultural attitudes and opportunities of areas of marginalization or injustice and deprivation. So within each of these levels of environment, we see physical aspects like the space that we're in, social aspects like our relationships, peoples, and objects that we interact with, and then our occupational environments, which encompass the meaningful activities, habits, routines, and roles that we partake in daily. So MOHO shows us that in our global context, for example, the physical environments like our climate are direct impactors on us, as well as us onto it. That was one of the cool things I liked about this model, was it shows not just environment's impact on us, but our impact on the environment. So our local occupational environment includes communities, while our social global environments would be the attitudes towards climate change and any policies on sustainability. Dr. Fisher gave a few examples from these contexts that I thought were quite beneficial in bringing the theoretical into the practical. So taking, what we learn and what we know into actually being able to put it into practice. So a lot of the clientele we engage with are in various stages of rehab. So she gave some examples like residents of a group home petitioning the height of recycle bins to be able to better reach it in a wheelchair or walker. Asking for visual signage for those that can't read but are interested in recycling to know where to put which recycling. Asking local food banks to repurpose food. Advocacy goals like supporting clients who want to make signs or attend climate change events. She even gave a specific spinal cord case study where climate change had affected this client's life due to increased flooding in this client's area where they lived. And it made her unable to be able to go to the tailor shop that she owned because she was using a manual chair and she couldn't push it through all the areas that had flooded. So the OT that was working with her helped relocate the client to a building where she could live and work and therefore not have to commute. Another OT model that I really like is the Canadian model of occupational participation that was in 2022 because it specifically focuses on occupational participation and is really land focused with a big emphasis on Indigenous peoples and the injustice and inequalities there. It also speaks to climate's role on health and wellness, which is really neat. So how did we get here? Human beings comprise about 1% of time. If you're looking at the evolutionary timeline of our universe and Earth's creation, Homo sapiens have been around for a little less than 200,000 years, and really at about 10,000 years ago, lived directly outside in nature. So, about 10,000 years ago, in the Neolithic age, humans began kind of creating agricultural communities and ending the more predominant reign of the hunter gatherer nomadic ways of life. About 5,000 years later, after that, tools and writing had evolved, and then 2,000 years ago, the human population reached 2 million. Around the late 17 to 1800s, the Industrial Revolution changed the planet forever. If you look at planetary history in the image of like a 24-hour clock, humans exist in the last 2 seconds to midnight. So, about 1/10 of a second ago, if you're taking that clock analogy, humans started impacting the planet in ways that have forever changed our climate. Since the Industrial Revolution, our emissions of harmful greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide have increased more than 40% since pre industrial times, with concentrations in our atmosphere more than all together in the last 800,000 years. So, with the invention of big cities, humans have created heat islands and urban areas that are absorbing more of the sun's heat due to there being more rooftops than trees and the incredible amounts of asphalt, paved roads, sidewalks, and parking lots. So, we know that soil sequesters carbon. So, anytime we put a man made structure like a road or a sidewalk on top of our soil, the soil can't do its job of sequestering that carbon. Another reason that I believe we're in a climate crisis is because of the distinction by very famous world changing Western philosophers like Descartes and Plato that ushered in the age of rationalization. So, that essentially stated that humans are above the natural world as we have the ability for metacognition that animals and plants do not, according to them. They argued that humans should use the earth and its inhabitants for human benefit, distinguishing us from the natural world that we were connected to and valued. The loss of spiritual connection to the earth that our ancestors and ancient civilizations had really crumbled in this age. An interesting 2024 article by two OTs studied the spiritual connection to humans and nature through gardening and more specifically farming. So it's well known throughout literature that when you live on the land, you have more of a reverence for the magnitude of the land, as well as a direct connection to the food that you're actually eating because you're growing it, or the animals that you're hunting. A 2019 study is among many in the recent years that found that people are often drawn to express, and I'm quoting here from the article, profound feelings of self-actualization or reverence when they feel the earth beneath their feet and the dirt on their hands. So, lastly, another huge reason for the disconnect from our life sustaining earth is related to capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy's view of the feminine. A 2022 article by Walters states that, and I'm going to quote here again, the climate crisis is a capitalistic crisis innately connected to modern conditions of capitalism, which are also colonial conditions. So this directly ties into linear versus circular economies that we'll look at in further detail in a minute. But another quote from the article summarizes it really nicely. Quote, there is substantial evidence that those who gain most from the status quo will do little to change it, with some governments denying the realities of accelerated climate change altogether. So connecting back to the previous point regarding spirituality and connectedness with nature, Shiva in 2021 stated that if we comprehend the world around us and its inhabitants in ways that we relate to it, then similar to Plato and Aristotle and Descartes, we will continue in these capitalistic ways of taking everything we can from the earth to suit our need and desires. So that occupational desires comes back up again here. As capitalism is built around taking whatever we want with no regards to the amount of waste produced, it's really time to switch mindsets into taking only what we need, which requires us to kind of unlearn a lot that we've been taught in our culture. Go and Whitehouse in 2019 coined the term ecofeminism, and I'm going to quote from their article. Ecofeminists seek to radically restructure economic, social, and political institutions. It makes explicit the link between oppression of women and the oppression of the more than human in patriarchal cultures. So the earth used to be seen as a symbol of fertility and life giving birth and rebirth. But since colonialism and patriarchy have become kind of the more dominant culture, degradation of the feminine has become rampant, occupational injustice again. Even calling the earth Mother Earth depicts this point when famous minds state that men are to be dominant over women, children, and the land. So there's an incredible requisite here to dismantle the understanding of nature as something separate from us. We are nature and nature is us. Our occupations at an individual, group, and community level really impact nature and vice versa. So, as we've seen up to this point, how climate change and sustainability fit within OT's role and scope and models of OT that can support this, now let's look at why we should care, why the fuss about changing the way that we're doing the things we're doing. Well, simply put, if we continue on this path, we will see an increase in sickness and disease. The climate and our health are inextricably linked and directly impact one another. If you remember back to our glossary of definitions, climate change is weather patterns over time. So actually over time, we're seeing warmer temperatures, which change the amount of rainfall, and it can lead to heat domes and drought, as well as the melting of glaciers, which shift that really delicate balance of salt water and fresh water, which impact the oceans and other bodies of water. So when drought and ocean desertification occur, we lose our food supplies and are more prone to intense and extreme weather events. I don't know how many of y'all suffer from allergies, but the last few years have been the worst on record, and it's actually related to the amount of wildfires and the lengthened pollen seasons. So, with this warmer weather, insects show up in areas that they haven't been before, looking for water and food, and this increases insect and warmer waterborne diseases like malaria. The reason for all this shift in weather patterns over time is directly linked to human occupations. We are the cause of the majority of these casualties and are reaping the consequences. We are seeing more and more people become sicker and sicker, especially the marginalized communities like children, pregnant women, and the disabled and elderly. Most affected are the lower income communities and the groups of people of color or indigenous peoples. Remember back to the spinal cord patient in the manual wheelchair that I mentioned who had to move to be able to live and keep her job due to climate related flooding. Research has shown that people whose activity patterns are not eco friendly actually rate themselves as less healthy and less happy than people in lower emissions household. Another article found that people living in green space that had green space nearby were healthier and happier. So this infographic is especially poignant because it shows the cycle of greenhouse gas emissions impacting rising temperatures, which lead to extreme weather and rising sea levels as a result. So the picture shows how everything is interrelated and connects to each other. So thinking back to our glossary of terms, this is where sustainability comes in. Sustainability was defined as meeting the needs of our generations, of populations and communities without impacting future generations. And this is really why it matters, because what we have done since the Industrial Revolution has affected our grandparents, parents, and us, and will continue to affect our children and grandchildren to come. I don't want to live in a world where the extreme heat in Alabama, where I live, keeps me from engaging in my favorite occupations like play with my kids at a local park or playground, or down the road possibly gives me heart-related issues or forced migration and more extreme allergies. I don't want my children and potential grandchildren to live in a world where historically out of control wildfires are commonplace and people in third world countries die to decreased water quality. So insect-borne illnesses or malnutrition from desertification is happening more and more. McKinnon in 2022 stated that the climate change is the leading public health concern of this century. Heat waves decrease the occupations of play and leisure as they decrease time spent outdoors. This was shown in a study in 2022 by Romanello. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly, that stated heat-related stress increased by 42% in the last few years. This article also stated that heat exposure in 2021 resulted in 470 billion less labor hours, most of which was in the agricultural sphere. So the bad news is that we have done this to ourselves, but the good news is that we can undo it. And that's happening more and more. So this quote beautifully articulates the definitions of sustainability and eco-patience to me. My family and I love to camp. We love to be outside in nature, and we always try to abide by the leave no trace camping rule. Pack it in, pack it out. So that's what sustainability and eco-patience are all about, never taking more than what's required and not meddling with our natural environment. The UN has found that since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, human occupations are the number one reason for massive climbs in climate change and climate crises. So let's take a minute, if you would like, to pause this and use the QR code above and on the next slide to determine your carbon footprint. And we'll take a deeper look into how sustainability and climate change how friendly those occupations are. So if you want to pause it here, you can. This QR code will take you to check your carbon footprint. So there is a website where you can take your water footprint if you're interested in that as well. Okay, so do sustainable occupations really matter? Do they have an impact? These are examples of occupations that I engage in through a sustainability lens. They also serve as examples of ways, if you're interested, that you can begin to incorporate sustainable occupations in your life. So take a moment and look at these to see ways that you're already engaging and maybe didn't even realize it in eco-patients. What areas have you never thought about switching things up but easily could? For instance, a reusable water bottle, glassware instead of plastic Tupperware, having your own reusable takeout silverware and straws, or reusing Ziploc bags, maybe using cloth napkins or paper towels that can be reused. Washing your clothes on cold water uses electricity, and line drying them uses none. So that's interesting. Your clothes end up smelling amazing as well. Plus, it keeps them wearable for longer and doesn't pull on the fabrics. Another way you can look at being sustainable is menu planning. So you're only buying what you need and you decrease your food waste each week. So this chart shows the difference that my sustainable occupations made when compared to the typical US household. So just incorporating those sustainable occupations or eco-patients that I mentioned in the last slide makes quite a difference when you look at it. This is just on the individual level. So think if an entire community or neighborhood took these actions collectively, what that could look like for our world and climate. So how do you compare? If you took your carbon footprint, where was yours? Our recycling that we do in our home decreased our CO2 emissions by 1,500 pounds per year. The average US resident produces 77,000 pounds of CO2 emissions. Our household was at like 45,000, so that's almost half. Drying our clothes on a rack or outside on the line reduces CO2 emissions by 523 pounds. Turning off our electronics reduced it by 146 pounds per year. And then using Energy Star appliances reduced it by 438 pounds. Our Energy Star appliance rating was 50 out of 100. And the typical is 50 out of 100, 100 being most efficient, and ours was 75. So the water footprint was really interesting. I don't wash my car super often and only do probably around 2 loads of laundry per week. We eat more fruits and veggies than meat, and I don't drink coffee. So my water footprint was less than the global. The highest consumer of my water was the fact that I ate meat. And according to the Sierra Club, it takes almost 700 gallons to produce a single cheeseburger, 22 gallons to make the bun, 4.5 gallons to grow the lettuce and tomato, 56 gallons to produce one slice of cheese, and a whopping 616 gallons to make the hamburger patty. So the infographic on the left here shows a global look at where the US emits most of its greenhouse gases, and we can see that the majority come from industries, transportation, and electricity. Agricultural sectors have been a huge noticeable shift in a good way in the climate change in the public because terms like regenerative agriculture and organic are more mainstream now. There's also been a big push by forestry lobbyists like the Nature Conservatory and the Sierra Club to decrease deforestation and desertification, which is great news. This shows that education and knowledge are power and that how we spend our money matters. We vote with our dollars in a capitalistic society, and choosing to buy non GMO or organic really does make a difference. Choosing to buy less plastic makes a difference as to how much plastic is consumed and then wasted. Municipal solid waste is the third highest emitter of methane in the atmosphere here in the US. And in 2018 alone, 146 million tons of the 292 generated ended up in a landfill, which is very common in capitalistic cultures where the linear economy model and that attitude is predominant. Drolet in 2020 suggests that the development of capitalism has led to an anthropocentric way of being in relationship to our environment, like I mentioned. It urges humans to decrease consumption, stating that a circular economy better respects Earth's and its resources regeneration. So let's look at what that really means. So a circular economy model it shows less raw material being produced in general, but also places value on producing less waste and therefore emitting less methane. So the European Parliament defines a circular economy as, quote, a model of production and consumption which involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products as long as possible. In this way, the life cycle of products is extended. So this is directly opposed to the linear economy, which I was speaking about, that the European Investment Bank defines as a system in which people buy a product, use it, and then throw it away. So the term linear refers to the straight progression that a product follows with a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's really little to no thought along the line regarding reusing it or recycling it down the line. So this is one attitude that can really be beneficial in the fight against climate change and used for educating on sustainable occupations. Next, we'll look into specific interventions globally and in our groups and communities as well as individually, both personally and professionally. So the image on the left is a picture of biophilic design or urban planning and nature-based solutions in Shanghai's airport, which I thought was amazing. It made me want to go to Shanghai just for the airport. It has various gardens in multiple terminals. Biophilic design is based on the biophilia hypothesis, which is a fascinating hypothesis. It was coined by Edward Wilson in 1984, stating that humans really do have a predisposition to nature and are inherently attracted to and therefore calmed by being in or near nature and natural elements. It's actually one of the main hypotheses that spurred me into doing nature-based OT as my profession. So the video on the right is an example of industry and business solutions in Europe. Let's see if it's going to work. Okay, so some interesting industry and business interventions close to my heart are I actually have a friend who's a sustainability manager and has worked at places like Nike and Mohawk. And she mentioned that Nike's science-based target aligns with their greenhouse gas emissions from the Paris Climate Accord with the decrease in the 1.5 degrees Celsius. They were also heavily focused on sustainable materials. So they're using like recycled polyester to make shoes. And then Mohawk is in the process of setting these targets and is focused right now on reducing electrical energy during manufacturing and moving to more efficient equipment. My husband is an engineer for Honda, and they're targeting zero carbon by 2050 through zero emission products like fuel cell and battery electric vehicles, while also being able to recycle both the vehicle and the battery. They have a cool project called Dreamo, which is a research endeavor to carbon sequester through algae plants. So that's really neat. The biggest takeaway here, though, since most industries and governments don't employ OTs, is to vote with our dollars. We need to be buying and thinking in a circular economy model, also advocating in our professional groups that we're members of. Join an environmental action group like the one that I'm a member of, and then vote. Let's reuse what we already have. So our clothes, toy swaps, buying from consignment stores. The Green Alliance in 2019 actually found that 80% of Black Friday purchases are thrown away after 0 to 1 use. So being really mindful and intentional on what we buy will lead our profession in spaces like AOTA and the World Federation of OTs. The World Federation of OTs developed guidelines for sustainability in practice, scholarship, and education, which includes ethics and standards. The UK, Canada, and Sweden all have professional standards for sustainable development, and AOTA's policy E16 that we talked about shows its support for sustainability, but that hasn't actually been transferred into OT academic standards. So find and sign their petition and communicate with AOTA and ACOTE committee that this policy really should be incorporated into ACOTE standards. The Philippines OT Association orchestrated a workshop in conjunction with government institutions to create disaster response, according to a 2013 article that was really, really interesting. And they did a lot of amazing stuff for the people down there. There were OTs in Spain who worked with the European Union to create Project Recover, which developed gardening and landscaping to employ people with mental illness and poverty. This was taken another step forward by the Girona provincial government and created more jobs like this for people who were experiencing social exclusion. This particular project, with the help of the Universidad de Vic in Catalonia, has become an international project, and actually Ireland joined it in 2015. There are medical doctors in the US that created the Medical Society Consortium on Climate Health, and it's made up of 47 societies and other health professions with the aim to mobilize and amplify the voices. I'm going to quote here, to successfully advocate for equitable client solutions that protect and promote the health of all people. As of right now, OT is not in that organization, and actually the Planetary Health Alliance gives out report cards to various healthcare organizations that are members of their group. And last year in 2024, OT finally joined for the first time since their inception, but only one group from the UK, and their grade actually was a D overall and an F in research pertaining to OT's role in planetary health. So, the World Federation of OTs in 2018 created the Sustainability Matters Guiding Principles for Occupational Therapy Practice, and they outlined 5 principles for sustainable occupational therapy. Principle 1 is understanding sustainability, so an occupational therapy's perspective. So, OT practitioners should be encouraged to educate themselves about issues of sustainability, is what this first principle says, and its impacts. So, like I mentioned before, AOTA's policy E16 is helpful, but moving that policy into actual ACOTE standards would be a lot more beneficial. Adding courses into programs specifically on OTs and sustainability or planetary health would be a great way to do this. Principle 2, the role of OT in contributing towards mitigation of environmental damage due to unsustainable lifestyles. So here it says that OT practitioners should work with interested service users and the communities to participate in healthy, meaningful occupations in a way that they contribute, and I'm going to quote here, towards mitigation of environmental damage due to unsustainable lifestyles. So the picture on the bottom left is a way in which I aligned with this principle. I worked with our local elementary school and created, and the city, and created a walkway for our families to walk from school, from the neighborhood, instead of driving. So next, my plan is to work with the city to find out how we can implement a recycling program in public areas like parks and playgrounds, churches, and schools. We don't have that right now in where I'm at in Alabama. I'm also creating a program currently for fourth and fifth grade girls about puberty education, and we'll specifically discuss options like reusable bamboo pads, period panties, and menstrual cups, as opposed to the disposable tampons and pads that are mainstream. Our university in St. Augustine actually has a commuter program for students to decrease the emissions in transportation. It's advertised on the homepage for students, which I thought was neat. The bottom right infographic shows a school-based intervention that I've gotten approval for to help decrease lunchroom waste. So principle 3 is helping OT service users adapt to the consequences of environmental damage due to unsustainability. So this is where OTs can really play a part, because occupational justice is environmental justice, and the people most affected by climate change are going to be those who are contributing least to it. So I partake in this principle by providing nature-based OT to neurodivergent children and children with a history of trauma in nearby communities, like the Red Barn, where I created a nature-based camp for foster kids at a hippotherapy center. So principle 4 is community sustainability in the face of environmental catastrophes. There's an entire AOTA task force for people who have dealt with natural disasters and aids in the adaptation to a life that looks really different from what they thought it would be because of climate-induced crises. So this is a hugely important topic, not one that's in the scope of this webinar, but there's a great deal of information on AOTA's website if you're interested. One area this has been incredible with is the Indigenous population through the Canada OT Association. They are working with the First Nations groups for wildfires in British Columbia. So principle 5 is developing professional competence for administering occupation-based interventions to address sustainability issues. So task in the task force, so the one on the upper left, the 1010, that is an infographic that shows how this principle can be adhered to through incorporating sustainability in activity analysis in our OT evaluations. Thrive is a group of OTs in the UK that has taken this principle to heart through community gardening, which is really neat to see. I had the privilege of hearing Louise Weissel speak at an OT for Environmental Action meeting recently, and she actually created this ADL guidebook back in 2011, so really before people were talking about it. And it has wonderful examples of how to incorporate sustainable occupations in your daily life. I do have the entire PDF if anybody's interested. I use it sometimes client education, so please reach out if you'd like that. A lot of these examples are ones that I referenced at the beginning of the webinar where I spoke specifically about my eco patients. They really do make a difference, like we saw in the carbon and water footprints. Making micro changes is really important. We often wonder if one person doing something can really make a difference, but it can, and it starts with us. So then it trickles into how we show up professionally. So how do we add sustainability lens into our OT evaluations and assessments? How can we repurpose and reuse our tools, our splint molding scraps? Can we re-gift DME when we're done using it? How are we educating our clients on sustainable occupations? Do we even think about that when we're educating clients? And how does it directly impact the environment and our health? If we're educators, we can play a huge role by increasing awareness and knowledge and setting up these future clinicians with information to disseminate to clients who will tell their families and their friends, and it will continue to pass on. We can print less paper. I know this was big in my master's program at UAB because we wasted so much paper and we didn't have recycling bins at our school. So having discussions around the lunch table at work when you're hanging with your coworkers about why you're using reusable Ziploc bags, glassware instead of plastic Tupperware, choosing a meal high in vegetables over meat. Bring your reusable water bottle with you to work and fill it up. When discussing ADLs, state the importance of sustainability to our clients. So, for example, if you have a client who's recovering from a stroke and has poor time management skills and therefore takes an extra long time in the shower, wasting water, maybe discuss a way to have a timer that would allow for a more intentional and thoughtfully sustainable shower. Make sure to turn off the tap water when you're not using it, brushing teeth with clients. Same for the lights when you're not in the room. Is there a way that you can unplug your hot packs when not actively using them overnight? Does your job have energy efficient microwaves, those Energy Star appliances, refrigerators, dishwashers? How about energy efficient light bulbs? Can you unplug electronics when you're not using them? Same with fluido machines, paraffin. Does your company fly you places? Air travel is one of the worst impactors to the natural environment. Is the option to drive instead of fly available? Take your clients outside. Start doing some nature-based OT. Access to green space is incredible for our health, as we've learned. A study in the UK saw that acute care OTs who took their clients with renal failure outdoors saw improved mood and communication skills, as well as a decrease in aggressive behaviors from a study that was done in 2023. Once enough people know and care and change even the fewest, smallest things, we really can change the community at large and then change the world. So we're at the end of the webinar, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to partake in this project. And I hope that you feel more educated on what climate change is, what sustainability is, the link that we as OTs can play. We looked at our current occupations and evaluated if they were sustainable or unsustainable. I hope that you calculated your carbon footprint or will when you get off of this webinar. And we saw real-time comparison about how that really can change things, how we can apply our knowledge and spheres of influence to increase wellness in our personal and professional roles. I hope you feel empowered to combine the understanding, evaluating, and analyzing to educate clients on how to engage in occupations for them that are meaningful, enjoyable, and sustainable as well. And you're welcome to scan this QR code for my references. Thanks so much again.